Individuals on the stage up here, and so what we'll do is we'll go ahead and go through introductions, spend about a minute each of us on just our background and our tie to the industry, and then segue into some great questions. Of course, there's a lot of stuff to talk about in relation to cannabis and hemp, but we'll try to keep most of it at more of a 101 level, since I know some of you are just learning about the industry in general. Although we know it's been around for centuries, but we won't get into that. Especially, and that's a good segue to this guy. So Dave, to my left, who I consider a friend and fellow HCGA member from Northern California, where my original tromping grounds growing up, and is with Sunrise Mountain Farms. And why don't we kick off with you and a little bit of background about what got you in the industry and what you're doing now.
All right, my name's Dave Santamino. Me and my wife own Sunrise Mountain Farms in Humboldt County. We're an organic cannabis farm. We really focus on regenerative farming techniques and building our soil and really creating a different model for growing instead of depleting the soil, but really feeding the soil, because giving a life to the soil is really what's going to bring out the best in the plant. And so we really focus on a craft style of growing cannabis. And we've been growing each for 20 years. We've had the farm for 15, and we've been in the legal market since 2016. Before that, we were in the medical market. And here we are. We're glad to be representing cannabis in this new age and what it's evolving to be. And we're really good to be in this, what's happening in this ever-changing market. It's been an interesting ride, but we're really glad to be part of it.
Nice. Perfectly, and we'll segue right on. We have another California, although like me, I think he travels as much as I do, so we just pay the taxes and the heavy expense of it. But another out of Southern California, we actually have a Jamal Heckler of, as you can see, Triple H and X, so if you want to give a little background as well.
Hey guys, I'm Jamal Heckler. Been growing cannabis for about 37 years. Started growing it when I was 10, internationally, with family members that had been previously growing it for like 200. So we kind of know about the soil, the biological of the soil, the content of the plant, the life of the plant, the expectation of the plant, it being a fruit or a fruiting type plant, the type of genetics that you'll need, the seed variety, the density of the seed. And most importantly, we learned over the years in my family about the importance of genetics. That's the most important thing you'll ever have, because the reason I started the Cannabis Club and started growing all over the United States was because they had a deficiency in genetics. Everyone thought they had OG Kush or they had Sour Diesel. They had these different types of variances, but they weren't consistent. So my life's journey was to be able to create the perfect plant, recross it, put it back into its original state to where it produces a succulent variety, a really good, strong genetic, something that will be pleasing. Because, a lot of companies today, like MedMen, Adam Bierman, I know him pretty good. We talk. They're famous for their investment, for their money. But it needs to be the reverse. You need to be famous for your product, because I know people that'll go all the way across to LA, averting all those other stores to go to a small hole in the wall to get an original cut of OG Kush, and it's just the way it is. So my whole thing, we exemplify the plant to make sure the plant's right, your business model's right, company policy, the SOP, all that's great and all, but if you're not growing anything that's gonna be dynamic, then you're wasting your time.
Nice.
I'm Jamal.
Very well put. And then we'll move on to Sherry Marie Howell, and you've got a lot of things going on, so I'll let you jump right into it.
Yes, thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Great to be here. First tobacco conference, so excited about that. I am a cannabis and agricultural attorney. I'm based in Florida, so I'm a Florida barred attorney. I consult everywhere else. I am in-house counsel for Your CBD Store. Sunflora is the corporation, so we have 600 CBD stores across the country, owned by affiliates of ours. So we are creating canna entrepreneurs at a reasonable rate, those who wouldn't traditionally be able to get into the industry on the marijuana side because of the high licensure costs. There's an opportunity to be one of our affiliates. We just gone international, so we have 2 stores in England, and we're opening a 3rd in England, so we'll probably have about 10 in the UK, and then we're looking at Mexico and Brazil for your CBD stores. I'm the former general counsel for Minorities for Medical Marijuana. I also am on the board of the U.S. Hemp Building Association. So that organization focuses more on the hemp fiber side, making construction materials. I'm on the board of the Hemp Feed Coalition. So that's where we talk about animal feed, animal bedding, and also like pet products, and working with AFCO and the FDA to get some type of legislations and protocols so that we can test, and then they'll be fine with commercializing. I do a lot of legislative work, so lobbying at a federal level, going from state to state. Last session, I was in Florida, Georgia, Alabama, Louisiana, Iowa, North Carolina, just working with the legislators, educating the legislators, and making sure that we have progressive laws related to the hemp industry. Besides that, I'm a Cann entrepreneur myself, or a Cannapreneur. So I have a merchandising brand called Canurban.com. We are being sold in 2 herb houses in Jamaica currently, t-shirts, hats, that type of thing. My consulting agency is Green Sustainable Strong, and I also, this past year, I've had 8 hemp cultivation licenses along with partners. So 5 in Pennsylvania, 1 in Maryland, and 1 in South Carolina. So I guess that's maybe 7 hemp licenses. We're looking to expand that footprint, working with farmers, empowering farmers. And finally, I do a lot of work with universities. So I'm on the University of Florida Hemp Advisory Board. I have relationships with a number of universities across the country. I have an MOU for hemp cultivation with the University of Maryland Eastern Shore. So really encouraging universities, especially law schools, because the cannabis industry needs more support from a legal perspective. So encouraging young lawyers, and I've spoken at law schools as a guest lecturer all across the country. So I love my work. This is my life's work, my passion. I am sometimes in 5 different states in a week, going to conferences and educating. And I tend to, especially this past year, go outside of the traditional cannabis conference and really penetrating new areas where cannabis will touch. So thank you for having me again.
Nice. And then last but definitely not least, we have Brittany Peliquin.
That is a tough act to follow.
Thank you.
I told you she could share it better than I could. I wasn't even going to do
It's
this.
so cool. My name is Brittany Peliquin, and I'm the trade marketing manager for Candescent. And a little bit about me, I came from the tobacco side. I used to work for Phillips & King, doing B2B marketing to all of you retailers. And I just had a passion for the plant and wanting to kind of understand how kind of a more everyday consumer could approach these types of products. And so I had a goal to work with a brand like Candescent. And what I love about our brand is that we seek to make cannabis more approachable for anyone who either may have not had experience with it recently or coming back into using the product, or have never used it before and are kind of understanding their relationship with it as legalization progresses. So instead of using strain names, we label our products with effects, and we're known for creating the effects architecture. We have our calm, charge, create, cruise, and sorry, I can't think of the 5th one. So what we want you to do is ask, how do you want to feel? And so when you approach the product, you ask yourself what you're really looking for, and you just identify with the effect, rather than trying to kind of educate yourself outside and then bring that knowledge. We just present the knowledge on the product itself. So yeah.
Nice. Cool. And my name is Lance Lambert, and my background, as shared, grew up in Northern California, a little town called San Anselmo, next to, if anyone's heard of 420. It's kind of an unofficial national holiday of our industry. I grew up in a little town next to that. That's San Rafael, where the Waldos are from. I was tied to the industry before legalization, just leave it at that. And surprisingly went to school to study criminal justice, and definitely took a different path when my career brought me to the legal industry. And although I voted on, we had medical, for those that don't know. Does anyone know how many legal states there are right now in the U.S. as far as cannabis goes?
Including medical and recreational?
Including medical and adult use, or recreational, which is another term.
I think about 43.
44.
Yeah, it's almost easier at this point if you do count, even states like Texas at some level, right, have a legalization at least around CBD only, to say how many states have still cannabis existing in the prohibition space or fully illegal, which would be Idaho, South Dakota, and Nebraska. So a lot of people don't recognize that a lot of efforts that all of us have put forth to continue to move forward with legalization and freeing the plant. So beyond working for Boveda, which I do love as being, their director of business development, I'm attached to the American Trade Association for Cannabis and Hemp on that board, also support groups like HCGA, Humboldt County Growers Alliance. And then same thing, work the tour, try to speak. I try to balance between international and domestic. For those that don't know, there's 40 countries around the world that have either legalized, deschedulized, or deregulated this plant. So think about that for a minute. To give a good example, a vast majority of South America has legalized. Europe is moving in the right direction. The first legal, what a lot of people call rec, but we try to be PC and say adult use, countries in Europe is going to be Luxembourg. But there's already places like Switzerland, Germany, Ireland and France are coming online this year for medical programs. Portugal is another example. There's gray markets like Spain and the Netherlands. People know of Amsterdam. But this is much bigger than just, there's parts and patchwork of the U.S. that's legalized. In Canada is legalized, and I remember Uruguay is the first adult use legalized country. It's so much larger than that. So we will try to focus on domestic, but just keeping in mind of the big picture, and pardon the pun, there's a lot of them in our industry, but looking at the trees through the forest. So we'll kind of jump right into it. A great segue, I think, is to kind of start with you, Dave. And you did come from, we talk about, again, medical and adult use. Dave came from what we call the Prop 215 era in California, which, again, came into fruition in 96, just like before that Prop P in 1990, which is originally for HIV/AIDS patients, is very much centric around true medical issues. I know there's jokes on movies like Friday about having glaucoma and all the rest of it, but the intent around the original medical program was for giving this medicine to patients that needed it for side effects of things like, dealing with cancer and such. So for someone who's legally growing cannabis in what is the largest market in the world, right? 40 million populace in California compared to 25 million in Canada, to give an idea of the pop. What are some of the challenges that you face as a cannabis grower, and how do you ensure the quality? And I've gotten to try, in full disclosure again, I came out of the green closet, as I say, in 2014. So I am a huge medical advocate and supporter, and you put out fire, as we say in the industry. I love what you put out. How do you maintain that, and how do you cope with now being in what is Prop 64 legalization for adult use?
Okay, those are two different questions, so I'll tackle each one on its own. The challenges that we really face are the ever-changing world of regulation. So what may be in place today might not be so tomorrow, and that's really caught us off guard with a few things, even as simple as packaging. You can make all your labels, and before you hit that click and buy on all those labels, you have to make sure that the verbiage is right, that the font size is right, and all these little things that the state might change on you at the last minute. Just as the cost of entry of getting in, we're luckily enough that we had a footprint that got us to be grandfathered in. And even now, though, we still have the challenges of getting ourselves compliant, getting the ADA compliant bathrooms, and getting all the water systems in place. And, it's something that we're taking it at more of a slow approach. This county is being kind enough to give us the time to do it. And then taxation, the over taxation of the product, cannabis being the only agricultural crop in California that has a tax on it before it's even sold, and so it really puts a challenge. Once again, we do have a county that is, they're sensitive to that, and they really help us with doing how we pay to them. But even still, down the chain of command, by the time the consumer gets that product, they're looking at such a heavily taxed product that they know they can still able to go and get it in the black market for cheaper. So really the overtaxation is also fueling the black market, which we're trying to kind of like get everybody to come out of that market to get into the white market. And then, just the challenges also of being in a competitive field, you know. So this comes into play with our quality. So our quality has always brought what we do to the forefront of the market. You know, we really pay attention to what we're doing. We really take care. We really have a passion for this plant. Definitely. And if we're really bringing it to the best it can be in the end. And with that has to come with the whole Korean natural farming aspect, the biodynamic farming and regenerative farming, you know, making our own nutrients, feeding the soil, having the right genetics to grow on the property, because that plays a huge part in it. Like, just listen to what you're saying about genetics, and that plays a huge part. Knowing we have strains that are resistant to molds and mildews, that can handle the rain, can handle the weather, and just knowing that, you know, we're also creating what is a kind of an Appalachia, and working together with all the farms in our area to create these zones that we can produce certain strains, or we know that we have certain weather patterns that we know we can work with to get a superior product in the end. And
we've had some good conversations as friends about how you are very cognizant as far as how you've expanded your farm, making sure that you do have all these things in place. I remember it was a few years ago in Southern California, because these small growers, we have everything from what we call cottage growers or boutique growers, smaller scale versus larger scale LPs or licensed producers. And I mean, you're in LA selling your product, to your point, because people like Jamal and I, that we're not canna snobs, we're connoisseurs. But we will skip over all that mainstream noise and boofa in order to get to the quality stuff, and sometimes it is a trip, but it's huge when these individuals, they aren't just coming down off the hill, as we say in California. I mean, a trek for you, if driving by car, you're talking 10 hours.
Yeah.
You know, for you to get down to our backyard to share your wares and actually let people see what quality looks like.
Yeah,
so.
and being able to focus on the shops that really, they look for that quality to put on their shelf. Because we don't need to be in every shop in California. It's not really our goal.
Yeah.
We want to be in the shops that really cater to what we are doing, because there are consumers that do go out of their way to look for that, find that quality.
100%.
So,
100%. Well, and then we'll jump over to the other side, and again with Brittany, you're based right up the road from me in Santa Barbara, which is a whole other Appalachia compared to Northern California. But a question for you: what are some of the common woes and obstacles, if you will, around promotion and marketing of cannabis, especially with a company that's built such a brand and reputation associated with it in, again, the largest legal market in the world?
Yeah, I love what you said about packaging, because that's such a point for us, because the packaging changes so frequently that it's difficult to buy in quantities that are affordable and then to have it not last through 6 months because it's changing, and then you're having your packaging department have to put a sticker because there's an extra warning label that needs to go on it, and you have, you know, your managers of I'm just pushing back and saying, like, we don't have time to put these stickers on, and just trying to figure out how to allocate those resources to make it work, because obviously we can't even go on the shelf if it's not gonna happen like that. But just, I would say the sort of normal marketer's playbook is you have to throw it out the window because of any kind of restrictions about advertising to children and that sort of thing. Google doesn't want us around. So anything that's associated with Google, Facebook, Instagram, you know, that's all really risky and for the most part prohibited. So anyone who's trying to come in from another industry is sort of faced with, okay, well, I don't have my like normal toolkit with this, but I think that, you know, in this room specifically, having come from tobacco, most people here would probably already sort of feel comfortable with that. I know that was something that was second nature when I moved over. It's like, okay, we have to make sure that 71% of the audience is over 21 and that sort of thing. So, I mean, where do you advertise? Clubs and things that you start to have to associate yourself with, maybe industries that aren't necessarily conducive to your brand, and that doesn't work out. So that really is part of the challenge. I think for us in particular, we kind of consider ourselves a lifestyle brand, and so the consumers change from region to region, really. I'm sure you guys know this really well, that we feel that Southern California, they're looking for one thing, and the buyers have one attitude, and then in Northern California, it's a completely different conversation. And so we're seeing a lot of turnover in buyer relationships and things like that, so it's really difficult to do relationship marketing. And I mean, so that's the side that I work on, you know, in B2B, and we want to, I was in packaging for a long time, and our main customers were just all the shops around LA, and you have a lot of people moving from address to address even because they're trying to stay afloat. Now that's the black market, and that's getting weeded out, not to use a pun, but again, so on our end, with being a lifestyle brand, our consumers very slowly trickling into the dispensaries. You know, they want to access delivery, and we want to sort of enable them, but that's a really long-term play. And so it is going to take a lot of really expensive consumer marketing and kind of getting people to see us as like the approachable brand, but we have to be in spaces that are not High Times and not Dope Magazine. We have to reach them somehow other than that. And then so you think of things like out of home and putting up a billboard. And I think obviously our brand, I feel very confident about this tastefulness about the billboards that we've had in the past, but the pushback may be that nobody wants to see that, and you never know what you're going to get with people complaining about that kind of thing because of the general mass attitude is still shifting.
Yeah, it's a good point. And what she's speaking of, a good example is Colorado. So most of you know that the first state to legalize adult use was Colorado. They voted 2012. It became an act in January 2014. That was the reason for me moving to Colorado and learning that, to your point, the 11th hour is when they're like, oh, what do we do about promotion? Because they were in a medical market segueing over to adult use. So all of a sudden you do want to target the mainstream, which is what she's referencing. People like you who might not have consumed since, if you're a boomer, as the kids say, since the 60s or 70s, or maybe in a Gen Xer, maybe since the 80s or 90s. A lot has changed. Even potency has gone up 3 to 4x in the last 7 to 10 years. So being cognizant of that, but they took what we called the ATF laws and they just applied them to our industry, which is very tough and something for you all to keep in mind coming from the tobacco industry, or if any of you have been or associate with the alcohol industry. There's things that these guys work with that those industries don't. One very simple example I'll give you is child resistance. So have any of you ever had a Coors Light or a Corona or a bottle of Tito's, for that matter, it has any sort of child resistance associated, or a two-step process around child resistance? That's what these guys are facing on a regular basis. The same can be said for cigarettes. So it's things like that. And to your point, the limitations, which can more so be associated with tobacco, right, on where you can promote. I mean, I was former director of media operations for all of Weed Maps. We put up a lot of billboards, but I was cognizant of where those now I felt a lot more comfortable with them being in Huntington Beach than I did in the hoity-toity side of Orange County. But again, these are the challenges we face, and I'm personally not a big fan of black market, white market. I like to call it more so the illicit market and legal market. But as we do shift into legal and get rid of the tabooisms and all these things that some generations can blame it on Nixon, those others, we blame it on a guy named Daryl Gates who started the DARE program in 1984 in Los Angeles, which Nancy Reagan took and ran with. But a lot of us do still have that stigma and need to get over that because, again, this plant is, I mean, it's a way of life for some cultures in this world. It never was illicit or illegal. I go to events, and I'll give example the Czech Republic in Prague and Berlin, where they had daycare on site for a cannabis event, because there is no stigma. There is no Nixon or DARE or reefer madness over their shoulders. This is something that never was considered to be comparable to, I don't know, opioids, methamphetamines, heroin, cocaine, fill in the blank, right, as other Schedule I drugs or even Schedule II drugs. So very interesting perspective. I do want to get to Cheryl. I'm kind of excited about this because we're a little biased in having the West Coast representation here. And in fairness, the West Coast has kind of led, Colorado West anyways led. Florida, I'm excited to talk about because this is, call it a purple, call it a swing, but Florida has this diverse politics, right? Because you have this influence, and I don't know if people know in Florida, I learned this from someone when I lived in Knoxville. All the northerners live in the south and all the southerners live in the north. So what that means is a lot of people from the northeast who want to get out of the snow move to South Florida. All the people in the north of Florida all move down from the south, from Alabama and Georgia. So you have this really interesting dynamic of red and blue and everything
like
in
two
between.
states.
Right? It really is like in California we could say the same. I'll claim NorCal all day, even though I live in SoCal. But I am really curious, what do you think some of the challenges have been in that state, and do you feel that because of this kind of oddity of politics, if you will, how much that has actually handicapped one of the largest, and again, if people don't know, California, New York, Texas, Florida, they're the largest. Those are all 20 million plus pop states. So that is a very relevant state in this conversation. But you've got
many
to be
industries, real estate, pretty much every industry, it's Florida, New York, California.
Yes.
Yeah.
So what, and you've lived there, you've been there, you've been through
Yes.
that, shot it down the first time, shot it down the second time.
Yeah.
I mean, how has that been as a challenge?
Yeah, so Florida is really interesting. I want to really just really follow up on a comment of Brittany and just talk a little bit about the marketing piece and challenges, because
sure.
On the hemp and CBD side, we have unique challenges with regards to legislation at a federal level and things like that, the FDA involvement. So I just wanted to highlight for those who want to hear a little bit about the hemp side of things.
And
that
USDA being involved with that too, right?
Absolutely. So
definitely
with the Farm Bill giving authority to the USDA as well as the FDA, and you know, the CBD industry coming from the dark side of things, or the gray area, where, you know, 2014 Farm Bill gave birth to the hemp industry and especially the CBD industry.
Yep.
In this country, at that time, there were like 3 CBD companies. Now there are thousands and thousands of CBD companies. But we've seen the approach from the FDA change, and they've broadened their definition of claims. So when we're talking about challenges, you know, for Florida, I think I definitely want to talk about national challenges as well with regards to how you market and being so afraid of something being interpreted as a claim. So a few years ago, I was in-house for Green Roads for 3 years, and when letters were being sent out during that time, you know, mostly it was for, you know, you don't have the CBD you say you have in your product. That was like, or you're making a claim like it cures cancer.
Yes.
You know, when the last couple waves of letters, you know, if you're posting on your website an article that was written about your company, that can be a claim. If you know, you have a customer who wrote something positive on their Facebook or social media, other social media, and then you share it on your page, that's a claim. So we've really had to navigate, you know, now I'm with your CBD store, Sunflora. I support other CBD companies, and that's the most common challenge is, can I say this? You know, can I say health? Can I say relief? And then when you look at the other nutraceuticals or you know, the dietary supplements, and you look at the commercials that are on television,
Echinacea, ginkgo
and all
biloba.
the health-related language that's being used for everything else, it almost feels discriminatory that, you know, if you have those 3 letters CBD in what you do, then your rules are completely different, and then things that other people can say and not be considered a drug or a pharmaceutical, for our industry, we're being discriminated against, and we can't say those generic terms. So that's a challenge that has increased over time. And also, even when you look at social media and how we're treated, I have a podcast that I recently started. I had one previously with my one of my former clients called Cannabis Life Radio, but the one I just started is Terps in the City. So again, Terps in the City.
That's great.
It's about terpenes, you know, it's about cannabis and culture, really.
Yeah.
But, you know, at the end of the day, for Facebook, they've blocked, I cannot boost anything.
Wait, so I'm confused. I don't mean to interrupt you, but so, I mean, let's just say hypothetically, so does everyone know what a terpene is? I won't get into it's a whole hydrocarbon. We won't get technical. It is the essence. So terpene is in oranges. Does anyone like cinnamon? It's in cinnamon. It's in vanilla extract.
Yeah.
So you're telling me that they block something where you could be talking about just general terpenes that exist in the environment in any biomass that exists. Yeah.
Exactly. So it's just this amount of prejudice against our industry because part of it is it's a steep learning curve for those who've been recently given authority. And previously they were told, you can't even look at this stuff. This is forbidden. You can't look at it. You can't regulate it. So they've just been like, this is just forbidden. And now they're like, here you go, regulate it. It's like they don't even know the terminology. Fortunately, state by state, you know, when you go to these agencies like the Department of Health and Department of Agriculture, they want to learn. So if you approach them from a perspective of, we want to be in compliance. Help us get there. Let me tell you what we do. Let me tell you how we have self-regulated for all of these years. Let me tell you how we want to get rid of the bad actors also. Let us help you.
Vapegate, good example. Right?
What's that?
The Vapegate, I mean, what happened with
Vapegate,
vaping?
exactly.
That was the illicit market,
bad
not the legal
information
market.
being pushed out, then retracted, then more bad information being pushed out. So, you know, those are some of the national challenges that we have where, you know, we always dealt with stigma as far as cannabis. Our hemp and CBD space has had to make an individual distinction. Are we going to say we're like cannabis? Or are we going to say, no, we're not marijuana though. We're, you know, so it's been like two different schools of thought. Some of us have been like, hey, you know, it's all cannabis. And some of us have been like, well, in order to get the laws passed, we need to say that this is completely different. You would never smoke hemp and, you know, those types of things.
But that's where, to your point, we're the FDA and USDA. So, not to geek out too much, but
please.
You talked about the 2014 Farm Bill, and for those that don't know, the 2018 Farm Bill was, I reference it as the hemp bill, because it is quite epidemic for them to descheduleize. Now, a lot of things that, to your point, to give more definition, if you look at the class of this plant, Cannabis sativa is Cannabis sativa. So marijuana, which again, I kind of feel is a derogatory term just because of what it was used as in the Nixon days, but the government won't change that, whatever. So we'll just say the THC flower side versus the hemp flower side, it's kind of like watermelons and seedless watermelons. But this is a little bit of, to your point, like which road do we go down in order to advance for the better cause, right?
Now we've evolved to where we're like, yeah, okay, it's the same plant. It's the same plant, you got it. It's the same plant, but it's a legal definition that makes the distinction.
Correct.
Which is the 0.3%. And it turns on the THC percentage as well as the sourcing. So being sourced, especially when you go from state to state, in their statutes, it indicates, you know, has to be sourced from a legal hemp pilot program in the past or a legal hemp program authorized by a state, blah, blah, blah. So, you know, it's very specific to sourcing in the United States through a farm that's been approved and with the less than 0.3% THC. And then now we have the USDA's rolled out their rules, which is even more restrictive, kind of tosses a ball to the DEA for some surveillance opportunities and monitoring and enforcement, which wasn't included in the Farm Bill of 2018. And I would almost say that it wasn't part of the legislative intent of the Farm Bill of 2018. So now we were like, okay, the DEA's not in it, now they're back in it, which again, they have a very necessary function, but it's making sure that we are not treated like lesser citizens. We are not treated like con artists who are trying to go around the law. Again, as a self-regulated industry, we have always wanted to do the good thing for the most part. There were always some bad actors, but we shunned the bad actors. We wanted to get good product because we knew, you know, one sick kid, one kid dying, that could topple the whole industry and we would never be legal. So we've always been in favor of regulations, in favor of public safety, but we are treated as if we're just trying to either get people high or circumvent the law. And I think that's really unfair. And I think that's why the legislative work is so important. I think everyone has the ability to lobby or advocate, whether it is in your community, at a municipality, from a municipality standpoint, because municipality people or leaders, city commissioners, county commissioners, they know the state legislators. Those are their friends. Okay? And your state legislators, they know the congressional leaders. Those are their friends. So even if you can't get to your state capital, even if you can't get to Washington, D.C., you can advocate and you can change the face of what is cannabis so that we can have progressive laws and we can make sure that the people who have the right to do just about everything else will have a right to choose whether they live or die, or have the right to choose what they use for medicines, and they'll be given a listing of options instead of being restricted to going in one particular pharmaceutical direction. And I think that's a fundamental right. I think there are going to be some developments in the future as far as really looking at the Constitution and the activity that's happened from a prohibition standpoint. Going to your question about Florida, it's an interesting state. We've had, 2014, there was an attempt for a petition to get on the ballot. We lost by 2 percentage points.
Yeah.
That was hard to take.
That was sad for those of us in the industry.
Very sad.
But then Salt Lake City, we got to, Utah passed the first time with the S1 too. That was the bottom of my, I was glad to be a part, but it's like, that's what surprises me.
It was really unfortunate, and again, it's the voters registration issue. There are a lot of things that have changed since then. We have, our felons who have served their time. They didn't have the ability to vote. There are a lot of people who, there was voter suppression, clearly, and we're moving away from that type of environment. But then when the activists also petitioned for the 2016 ballot initiative, and that was successful by a landslide. 71% of the state said we want this. Prior to that, the state legislators had approved marijuana, medical marijuana, but only low THC, which is 0.8%. So it's a huge victory.
What was the one, sorry, I didn't interrupt, but wasn't it something got into civil around being able to consume flower versus being a flowerless state as well, right?
Yeah, that's a recent development. So it was all extracts, and then the legislation was changed upon the prompting of Governor DeSantis last year, so that flower would be permitted. So we had to wait for the edibles change to happen, and then we had to wait for the flower change to happen. So we can have flower now, which is a huge victory. I think from a licensure standpoint, we suffer from significant cronyism, and where we are right now is we've only had since 2015 one round of applications. That one round of application, which was intended to give out 5 licenses, one in each of 5 regions in the state, that pool of original applicants where they were required to be nurserymen
I was going to
for
say that
30 years.
I was appalled. I mean, this is where well, then Sheldon, an individual that owns a very successful casino here, I remember he's putting millions up against the first time for it to lose, because it's something he owed a little favor to in Miami, a certain family.
The addiction industry.
Yes, and it's just a point on the politics, you guys. So to get into it, not to go too far down a rabbit hole, but this is what we're facing, and unfortunately, although this was a cash crop of this country when it was founded, we do have a big target on our back as a point as far as a disruption to the textile industry, disruption to the alcohol industry, where we've seen double digits in drop in alcohol consumption in legal states. Or all of a sudden, hey, heaven forbid, we consider an exit drug, not an entry drug for people in opioid epidemics. So, I mean, there's so many things, and these are some of the challenges. Of course, there's great opportunity. I mean, most of my friends do say, what do you tell people that want to get into industry? I tell them to run. I wouldn't say it's necessarily that, but just know that there's a lot of individuals been doing the legwork for some time to get it into a better place. So,
and sometimes it's baby steps. So we've had, diversity language put in, and then the flower thing. But it still stands. We've had one round, and they're picking from the same pool that was supposed to be 5 licenses issued. They have 22 licenses issued from that same group of 30-year nurserymen, and that is what we're fighting against. And we're fighting against the fact that we don't have the diversity that we need to have as far as the ownership in the Florida industry. And then even on the hemp side, the Commissioner of Agriculture just rolled out, this classification called hemp food establishment, which means anywhere hemp is sold, you need to register as a hemp food establishment. So there are contracts that have been canceled with big box retailers because they're like, I don't have to, why would I register as a hemp food establishment to get this little certificate just to sell your bars?
This is the thing. Trader Joe's and Sprouts, more of a West Coast. I mean, we've had hemp products. We've had hemp seed products for years.
Yes.
It's great. But then I think just the point, like looking at Florida versus even just Oakland in California, and how they've been open-minded to diversity and to giving the opportunity to individuals that have been incarcerated for a freaking plant, excuse my language, for how many decades. So, and it's a kind of a good segue to what I actually want to ask Jamal, because you've been tied to some really cool things and some forward-thinking ideas, one of them being a club, again, in the heart of, for those that don't know, I mean, LA City's 3 million, LA Metro's 13 million people. Yeah. That's larger than a few states combined on the West Coast. So what are some of the things that you've seen, and I think this is a great segue, as far as some of those tabooisms, some of those stigmas associated with what's called the plant, like what have you seen that's changed in the years that you've been associated with it? Both, again, I prefer like legacy or, traditional OG market versus full-blown legal market. Yeah. What have you seen that's happened over the recent years?
Well, I've seen the evolution of the plant come a long way, and then being involved in the business and the evolution of business and the needs of the business. It's been almost pragmatic to say, hey, this guy has better stuff than you do, and so it's almost like a war between, medical cannabis and recreational cannabis, and so the inclusionary measure that we try to put together is the fact that we try to make sure everyone has a shot at the dream, that's why I kind of created the Cannabis Club, is to be able to consult with people, help them write company policy, be able to put them in touch with people that are professionals on genetics or different types of, let's say, SOPs. Yeah. There's times I get calls to go into a city where they want to have a consumption club, and that's my specialty. I'll solicit a cigar club or someone to help us write the contract. When we write the contract, we go to the city, and everything is contracting when you deal with cities and jurisdictional contracts. And so when people say, hey, I want to be able to change the law in my city, what do? Like she said, you go speak to the council, but they have jurisdictional contracts that they wrote in charters for each city. And so you got to be able to break those things down and be able to propose a change in the charter. And then when the charter changes, then that's when jurisdiction rolls down to the police. It says, oh, it's in the charter now. And so we can have a club over there. There's been times I had to battle in certain cities to get a club put together by taking the trademark and the copyright off the building, taking the zip code off, and then going into the county sitter planner, taking the rights away from the city a little bit at a time. And then they says, well, how'd you do that? I says, well, everything I do is in trust. Yeah. I can go into Florida right now and open a club if I create a trust, because a trust has more rights than any human being out there. Because if there's a problem, we're going to go to international court, and they're going to lose because we're all in the same game here. They're basically doing something that's not federally legal, so it's a little bit of racketeering, but these guys have the police that, hey, and so being the fact that, Cannabis Club, I give guys the insides on what's really going on. Yeah. I don't want to make noise. We just make opportunities.
That's right, man. I had to chuckle when you said racketeering, because obviously keeping an eye on an industry that, again, isn't too excited about us, but that is big pharma, and seeing CEOs that are actually getting taken down from these opioid pharmaceutical companies under a law that is racketeering, that was put in place for the Buzzy Seagulls of the world at that point. But then again, you get 280E. That's another thing that, thanks Bob Dole, Ronald Reagan era, that he came up with 280E, which is, in my opinion, and from a political standpoint and a legal standpoint, you might have a more defined, but I mean, that's essentially the government becoming a shareholder of your company. That's when you're paying that many taxes towards something, hey, you're not doing what we consider legal, but can we get a 20% cut?
We can still.
Is that cool? Yeah. So that's what makes me, I mean, you start the term like mafia, I started wondering who that should be associated with as far as groups in this country.
Well, you got to think, each city is unto itself. Either it's a sanctuary city or it's a city that's got federal funding, they have more leeway over what you're doing. That's why when some people want, really powerful genetics, they come to me and says, hey, the guys from Chicago, they don't call me. Because they says, we got to have the low THC, man. We want to, I said, I have that too. So I go out and we do the social equity thing, and we set something up to put them in contention at maybe 15 to 16%, so they can make some money, so they're not wiped out completely at 30. Because that's like really killing these guys. They're not going to buy that. So basically, if they wanted to change the percentage law over there in Chicago, they could go in and write up something, propose it towards a charter, or they could ignore it altogether by putting it in trust. And then once they create a trust, they could battle out in court and say, hey, this isn't lawful.
Nice. Well, I have one last question. We'll have a few minutes, but this is one. I do a weekly cannabis catch-up segment on SiriusXM, and the host actually asked me this question. It's a tough one, but asks, how many years or what year do you feel that cannabis will be legal at a federal level? And my answer was 2022. I mean, we've talked about how, this could, for all intents and purposes, be an ace up the sleeve of Trump on trying to save himself in getting a second term. We obviously know how some of the Democratic politicians feel about being pro-cannabis. But if you could give a year on where you think federal legalization, or at least descheduling, let's give it that. What year do you think that would be, Dave?
I mean, I can be hopeful and say 2022, but it really has to do with the administration that gets put into place and whether or not they open their eyes to a whole new industry that could be generating revenue and creating a whole new industry for a bunch of people that don't have jobs.
And so you guys know there's already been, as of last year, 217,000 new jobs just associated with the legal cannabis industry. Again, that's not even getting into what's happened with hemp and growers in places like Kentucky and the Carolinas that have flipped from tobacco to hemp. So a good example. Jamal, what's your number?
I'm going to say if Trump wins, he's going to legalize it, because him and, Mitch McConnell, the Republican Party, I'm bipartisan. I work with anyone.
Yeah, I do too.
I believe it's going to be 2021 because if he wins, then it's going to take a slight gesture of Mitch McConnell saying, hey, we're going to change just a small jurisdictional code. We're going to allow the guys down on the legislative side and the law enforcement to actually make the adjustment for testing kits that they're doing now.
Yep.
That actually have helped. Because I had a congressman flying out to LA next month to actually talk about, federal law and how to be able to set up some things that can help police officers. I mean, I want to see less people impacted by it.
Yeah.
So I'm willing to help, like she talked about, teaching. And it's more or
about
less
education.
not so much as, recognizing how to arrest someone. It's being able to make sure people are compliant so the officers know not to overstep their bounds because they're actually court officers that are bound by a duty. Hey, license and registration, that's about it.
Yeah.
So we're going to work with that. But I'd say 2021.
Nice.
Yeah, 2 years ago I said 2 years.
Yeah.
So I was optimistic. And I think, I still feel good about 2020. I do think all the political candidates are pro-cannabis. I think Joe Biden probably was the least favorable.
It kind of took a wrong turn there, right?
Mitch McConnell, he's from Kentucky. Kentucky's very adverse to marijuana, but pro-hemp. So I haven't seen him make that type of movement as far as marijuana side of things. But I think, what's most encouraging is, the Energy and Commerce Committee had that hearing 2 weeks ago, which was about 2 hours long. And I think they got to flesh out some of the sophistry of these agencies. Like you have this research institute or university saying there's a legal cannabis dispensary across the street from me, but I can't get cannabis there, but I have to get it from Ole Miss, which has mold, by the way. And you're not adding any other locations to the list, even though we've been applying for years.
Yep.
So I think the fact that some of those issues have risen to the surface and there was more accountability, I'm more optimistic about, I'm optimistic about 2020 seeing some change, but as far as the actual execution and rollout of the change, I think it'll take us a couple years to get there. We're already seeing how slow the FDA is moving with regards to the CBD side. 2018, we passed a farm bill, and the FDA still hasn't put their rules out.
Correct.
So if we use that as an example, it could be another 2-3 years before the FDA puts their rules out. You realize that based on them trying to find adverse conditions. So
they're still slow. It's the government.
So the government, it moves slow. So I think I think we'll see something positive pass that legalizes this year. Okay. But I don't think as far as implementation and execution and us feeling it and feeling like it's legal, I'm thinking it might be 2023, 2024.
Okay.
Yeah.
And last but not least, Brittany.
I also had this optimistic outlook 5 years ago, and here we are 5 years later, and I thought for sure by now we would have reached it. But I think I can attribute that to sort of being in a vacuum sometimes of attitude towards cannabis, where I'm constantly surrounded by my colleagues and my friends and feeling like, everybody is fine with cannabis. And then you step out and you see your relatives from another state or whatever, just it's sort of stereotype, but and you realize that they don't even know the difference between CBD and THC or what CBD is at all.
Yeah, what cannabinoids and terpenes are. Right? This is all an education conversation.
Right, and so I think I just read a survey that 50% of people don't know the difference between CBD and THC. And so I think the more I sort of feel that my role is to, like, boots on the ground, just be hand-to-hand combat with people I interact with any chance I can to just make it feel normal.
Nice.
And the more that I can take that on, that it might help in some small way to just start those feels going out. If I had to make a guess, I'll just say another 5 years.
Okay. Well, I want to thank all of you because obviously you're industry leaders, but this has been an undertone in conversation at your own equal levels. You're educators, and that is the one thing that I think is the most powerful in any conversation or any topic associated with what all of us, which you can tell, are legitimately passionate about. So really want to thank everyone on the panel. If you guys could give them a round of applause. And thank you all for your time, too. Definitely appreciate it. Thank you, guys.